Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and in today's episode, we are focusing on the government's latest and long-awaited 10-year infrastructure strategy. Because after decades of underinvestment, fragmented planning, and inconsistent delivery, the government has finally published what is perhaps the most comprehensive and ambitious infrastructure strategy in a generation. Backed by at least £725 billion worth of public funding over the next 10 years, the new 10-year strategy for infrastructure aims to chart a long-term path for economic renewal, regional growth and national resilience. So it's quite a moment. And to discuss this milestone document, I'm joined by James Corrigan, Managing Director for Infrastructure at consultant Turner and Townsend. At TNT, James's day job is working with clients to turn this kind of aspiration into reality, making him well placed to guide us through this new strategy and perhaps explore the challenges and opportunities that it presents, because there's a lot in it. I mean, how to reshape the way the UK plans and delivers infrastructure, how we address critical issues like climate change, digital connectivity, housing and economic growth, and of course what it all means for investors, local authorities and communities. We're going to tackle all that lot, so let's get into it. James, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, good to be invited on.
Good. Well, as I say, this strategy is quite a thing. For the first time, it brings together economic, social and housing infrastructure under a single vision. It recognises that schools and hospitals, for example, are just as critical to living standards as roads, railways and clean energy. And it also introduces this national infrastructure pipeline to give industry greater certainty, sets out new standards for planning and signals a more coordinated approach between central government, devolved administrations and the private sector. So, James, you've seen it all before. I mean, what would you say is the single biggest change that this 10-year strategy introduces compared to, previous approaches to infrastructure planning that we've seen across the UK?
Yeah, thanks. I think obviously in your intro you've mentioned some of the themes that obviously is unique about the document, the sort of blend of social and economic infrastructure obviously being one. But I think the other thing that makes it sort of exciting for us at Turner and Townsend and me as an infrastructure professional really is around the fact that it seems to be backed up by a number of sort of enablers to make it a success. If you look at some of the elements around sort of introducing private finance, it touches on some of the procurement reform and how that can be used to make this a reality, coupled with planning legislation and changes that are being looked at there and considered. It feels a much more holistic piece that actually could, give the market sort of confidence that the UK is going to invest in its infrastructure. And
of course, let's not underestimate the fact that it's actually backed by quite a bit. Well, I've said £725 billion worth of public funding that's committed over 10 years. How realistic do you think that is, given the fiscal pressures and inflation risks that we're facing right now?
Well, I think obviously we are eagerly anticipating the sort of pipeline to say, well, where's that, the 700 billion going to go? How's that? What's the makeup of funding? What's the sort of profile of it over a sort of period of time? How quick does it sort of ramp up on that period? But I think, which obviously I think is a great commitment, firstly, from the government and is a good starting point. But I think secondly, obviously with one thing that does give me hope is obviously with the considerations around private finance now that may be introduced. If there is a squeeze on fiscal policies, because they create the right environment to encourage private investment, that can obviously act as a balancing act later on if there were some of the fiscal challenges that you referred to.
Yeah, but I'm right in saying, James, you're feeling quite excited about it.
Yes, I mean, for us, it's a really exciting moment. Obviously, as we look forward, it really helps us to engage our teams. It helps us to look at how we shape our investment in the business and research and development, and obviously from a geographical perspective and sort of sectoral one of where we should be investing for the future.
Yep, and because crucially, as I said, the strategy aims to integrate the economic, the social and housing infrastructure, which I imagine is, at an organisation like TNT, when you're working with your clients, you're trying to do that on a day-to-day basis. I mean, what are the practical benefits and risks of this broader joined-up approach from the government?
So as you say, I think at Turner and Townsend, we operate across obviously most of the sectors, including real estate, infrastructure and energy and natural resources. And one of the things that really excites is around where you can get a project to go ahead by infusing it with the other components. So you look at it from how do you get private sector invest, how do you get oversight development into rail projects, how does that sort of come together to sort of close the funding gap?
Yeah.
So I think for us, it enables us to combine the different specialisms of our business and actually further support the sort of pipeline to make it a reality.
And that's talking about outcomes, I suppose. You're focusing on outcomes for not just individual sectors, but whole communities.
Absolutely.
I mean, the reforms, as I understand it, are going to be led by this new National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, NISTA, creating an opportunity to really drill into the ambition of the strategy. But why is this body so important when it comes to making this strategy a reality?
Well, I think as in the Transformation Authority, I think it's fundamental to make it forward. I think if it does, if it delivers on that ambition, it'll be a real cornerstone. Obviously, it connects the needs of infrastructure of the future with the sort of enabling successful and implementing successful delivery. So I think that's sort of core, sort of fundamental to take this from cradle to grave almost in terms of these major schemes from the starting point to the end. And I think it should, in connecting the two departments together, give that sort of connectivity and confidence that this is a long-term solution as opposed to it will shift as time goes by.
So it's about not only strategy and working out what we're going to do, but actually how we do it as well. But realistically, how transformative do you expect NISTA to be in addressing those long-standing delivery and coordination issues across government? Because one of the reasons that it's so hard is that a lot of these ideas are delivered by individual government departments. The job, I suppose, is to bring them all together.
Yeah, and I think with the new government's commitment to outcomes and missions, I think that it sort of talks to that same objective, doesn't it, around how do they integrate across different departments, how do they work together to deliver those integrated outcomes. I suppose it's also has been pleasing to see through the spending review, there's been longer term settlements for departments. That means actually you can start to consider some of these more integrated objectives more holistically. And obviously NISTA, I think the key thing that in engaging with the sort of wider sector is around how does NISTA have real sort of teeth in this A? How does it become have real clarity in its purpose and is able to execute as opposed to being seen as a sort of advisory panel? I think is
because delivery, as always, when it comes to converting cash and aspiration into outcomes, that is always the key thing: delivery. And given the UK's historic struggle with major infrastructure delivery, I mean, what makes this new model more likely to succeed from your perspective?
Well, I think there has been obviously the struggles in delivery of major programs. I think I suppose part of the strategy is to give the stability almost to that, coupled with NISTA being a stable body to take those things through. I think there's been lots of work done in the UK on major program delivery of how to capture that learning, how to bring that forward. And hopefully, as part of NISTA, there's one of the other key differences they've set out is to engage the private sector, to use specialisms from industry. So I think it feels like it's much more of a partnership with industry as opposed to just being a sort of government advisory body that looks at some of these schemes. So I think if they can harness that from sort of around the globe into using private sector, will hopefully give it a much more realistic chance of success.
Yeah. Well, we're not short of lessons learned documents at the moment, particularly around projects like HS2. For the James Stewart review, we've had Mark Wilde's, the CEO's assessment of where we are. I mean, what lessons do you think, more generally, the government really can learn from previous mega projects? I mean, I mentioned HS2, but there's also Crossrail, and you might look back to the Olympics, which perhaps was more of a success again, which TNT have had a hand in majority of these. I mean, how are they likely to be applied in the future?
Well, I think one of the key things, I think, in some of the documents, without going into sort of details around the consistency of what the projects are there to achieve, and there's lots of the strategic intent of these schemes being set out at the outset and how well they're sort of adhered to has been a big part of it. Obviously, we've seen change in sort of policy affect some of the schemes. But I think also with the government's announcement on the sort of new unit to consider projects of over 10 billion in a sort of specific way does, I suppose, really signify the appreciation that these schemes are fundamentally difficult to deliver. They require lots of collaboration across local communities, different government departments in order to make them a success. So hopefully with that sort of increased rigour, coupled with the sort of lessons learned documents that you refer to, will give us a much more successful chance of delivering these schemes more effectively in the future.
But of course, the way that infrastructure is set up is we do look at sector-specific projects. I mean, whether it's transport, energy, housing, digital. I mean, are there sectors that really stand out as likely to benefit most from this long-term approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things from my perspective, and we've seen real positivity, obviously, in the investment in the water sector, in sort of announced with the sort of AMP8 spend and the settlements there. But the one thing that seemed to be not getting as much sort of positive news was the transport sector. So I think the investment in a lot of the local schemes, particularly light rail, which is obviously much quicker to get to benefits, I suppose, and for local communities, and links into the sort of I suppose whole spatial agenda and linking into sort of places, I think was a real sort of thing from my perspective. And seeing that commitment of the 15.6 billion was a really good initiative, as well as obviously the connection to East West Rail, and was all good news, I suppose, for the sector.
Well, certainly there are an awful lot of numbers that are attached to that pipeline. We'll get a bit more into the detail of what actually is in there, but before we do that, let's talk a bit about you, James. You've been with Turner and Townsend for nearly 20 years now. I mean, how do you describe your role? What do you get up to there?
Sure. I think, so 20 years, I actually started as a summer placement student, and then was converted as a graduate in 2006.
They made a promise of huge returns, did they, after that summer placement?
Yeah, something like that. I think it was, a good opportunity to get some experience in industry, and then obviously converted in. I think really it's been good for me to see the growth in I suppose, the infrastructure sector that has been replicated within Turner and Townsend itself. I think in terms of my current role, I look after all of our core markets that make up infrastructure. So whether that's an economic infrastructure, I suppose, is the focus, whether that's transport, being roads, rail, ports, aviation, or into environmental resilience, looking at flood defence, into sort of coastal protection as well, and obviously the water sector itself. But I also look after our digital and program advisory teams, which are really there to try and drive greater efficiency in the way that we support our clients in delivering their projects and programs.
Yeah. So when you get a strategy like this that is looking at, I suppose, social infrastructure as well as economic infrastructure, they're looking at housing, schools, etc., hospitals, prisons, you have to then work with your counterpart within the business to make sure that is a joined up approach.
Yes, I think so. One of the things it does do is encourage that sort of greater collaboration across the business to really bring out the sort of different specialisms that we have within, and how can we sort of combine the learning together to help sort of navigate it for our clients. So
I'm always interested about people on the podcast where they've built their careers. What over the last 2 decades? What kept you at a single firm for those 2 decades? Is there sort of something you can put your finger on?
I suppose Turner and Townsend has always been, the underdog, as it were. And so it's been quite a good way to sort of, come up against some pretty significant organisations and go through. And on the journey, we've managed to have some really good breakthrough moments. And I suppose it's sort of, when I started, we were at 1,500 people globally, we're now at 23,000. So I suppose the fact is the business hasn't really stood still. It's always been doing something different. And therefore, to me, it doesn't really feel like I've only had one job, if you see what I mean. It feels like I've had multiple jobs in different eras or different parts of the business in how it's grown.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, but and it's that constant change which keeps you interested, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. It's it doesn't stand still for very long, basically.
You're London based,
yeah,
but you've got a national role, living in St Albans, and I hear you've got 4 kids between the ages of 2 and 9, so you're pretty busy.
Yeah. No, I have a sort of second job as well, which is an Uber driver for some of the kids to get them to various sort of classes and things. And
I imagine you do. Well, how do you balance your work? Because you're busy at work, you're busy at home. How do you balance those two things?
I think, I suppose, try and take the downtime when I can get it, if you see what I mean, and try and focus on family at those points. I think one of the things I'm trying to work on myself is being in the moment at that particular point in time. So if I'm at work, I'm at work, and that's my focus. And obviously, just, I suppose, trying to create the complementation between the two things is an important part of what I do, and as well as trying to have some social hobbies myself, and I took up golf, which is obviously quite a time-consuming game, but an incredibly frustrating one. But it does give you a bit of time to sort of think.
Well, that is an interesting choice of pastime for somebody with so many family commitments. Because my experience of playing golf is I don't know about you, James. It's not a short activity. It takes some amount of time. Have you noticed that yet?
I have, yeah. I'm not often. I don't play regularly.
Okay.
But I think it's a good thing to do because I think it's gives you a different social sort of perspective. I'm also getting a little bit older, so my previous hobby of football, which is quicker, but is at more greater risk of injury, I suppose, and therefore that gives me a bit more of a sort of concern that I may be out of action for a longer period.
Yeah, no. Well, apparently the worst one is cricket. Apparently, that can actually take considerable amounts of the weekend.
That is the whole day, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, well, good luck with that. I will keep my eye on how you're getting on with that golf. Let's talk about planning reform. I mean, effectively getting these investments lined up is something which I know you at T&T, you're very skilled at helping clients achieve that, turning aspiration into reality. I mean, how confident are you that the proposed planning reforms, things such as the Planning and Infrastructure Act, can overcome these long-standing barriers in the UK's planning system? Yeah,
I think I've been attending a number of sort of sessions on the sort of planning reform recently to sort of get a feel for it. I'm not a planning professional by sort of background, but there does certainly seem to be, whilst it's been talked about for a long time, there does certainly seem to be some action already taken place by the government in some of the amendments, some of the updates that have been made. I think there does seem to be a real willingness to accelerate the process. There's much talk of the use of digital to take out some of the repetitive processes. So I think it does seem like a really a good platform to sort of build from. I suppose the proof will be in the pudding, as it were, in terms of, I think it's well documented that the duration for some of these national significant infrastructure programs has increased over the period of time when they're supposed to have decreased. And therefore, I suppose the real test will be, what are the sort of pilots or case studies that will adopt the new techniques or the early adopters, as it were, and how will they sort of go forward with them and demonstrate the effectiveness of their use.
Well, there's a lot of talk about fast-tracking 150 planning decisions, which could, discuss. Could it risk sidelining local voices or environmental safeguards? Are we moving to an environment where, because the mission is all about economic growth, then issues such as local voices and environmental issues become less important?
Yeah, I think I would say it's there's still a very rigorous process that you have to go through in order to get these schemes across the line. I think ultimately there's still significant amounts of consultation that need to take place. But I think what there is a sort of commitment to do is to try and reduce duplication between different parts of the process. As I mentioned earlier, to try and use digital to make certain aspects of data analysis more effective and efficient, to reduce doing the activity twice. I think also the other bit that I would say is that there is also some risk associated with it, obviously, in the fact that if you do speed up planning, is there a chance that maybe there's process missteps that occur or that actually could be then challenged as part of the process as it's get later into the sort of cycle? So there's the sort of pros and cons, I suppose. But I think there's a real commitment that the government recognises, and as you said in your opening, that there's been an underinvestment in infrastructure, and we now need to make it easier to do sort of business here and encourage that wider investment by giving a stable planning.
Yeah. Well, the phrase that the construction minister said to me was, you can't always say no. And I suppose that is a good position. I suppose as long as you make sure that there are those backstops in place to make sure that local voices are being heard.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the big things, and you mentioned it yourself, is bringing the private sector on board. It's crucial to the strategy's success. What would you say are the most promising mechanisms that have been outlined in the strategy to attract that vital private capital?
I think there's been a number of things that have been set out, really. I think expanding the remit of the National Wealth Fund. I think there's obviously different models being articulated around the RAB model that was used at Thames Tideway. How can we, and is sort of advertised for Sizewell, how can we use that more substantially? So I think it sort of really signifies there's a sort of different solutions for different types of projects and programs, and which hopefully will give for different investor risk profiles, give a sort of balance on which may be right for them to invest within.
Ultimately, though, the fact that we have this strategy and we have this pipeline with numbers attached to it, that gives the private sector, the investors, confidence that the UK means business.
Absolutely. I think that's a sort of real shift, isn't it? And once the pipeline comes out that articulates that in further sort of granularity and detail, it will enable investors to make decisions on where they would most like to invest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you speak to investors, you speak to your clients all the time. I mean, what risks are they highlighting that's still there? What's still potentially stopping them putting in what, arguably is vast sums of available money, which we see around the world? What's stopping them still?
Well, I still think, obviously, until this starts to get into place, political stability is obviously an important part of it. How the strategy will be taken on, how does that sort of go forward? I think delivery capacity and sort of the market capacity to deliver on some of these ambitious schemes is obviously something that will make people nervous. But I think also there's been lots of talk around regulation and sort of delays and associated with that.
Yeah.
And what does that sort of mean? How will the regulators enable these projects and programs to go forward successfully? As well as some of the more sort of macroeconomic headwinds around interest rates, et cetera, and how does that sort of come together as a sort of, I suppose, a balanced basket of potential risks and upsides that would encourage them to go forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've reflected back on the Labour government of 1997 that invented the PFI, and we have got another Labour government who is doubling down on that and renewing its interest in public-private partnerships, and it obviously has got to give it a different name. Is it a genuine shift in thinking, or is it just a realisation that we haven't got enough public funding to do what we need to do?
I think from my perspective, it's probably both. I think obviously you have to recognise the fiscal constraints, but also it does look at a strategic sort of shift. It looks at how can you co-fund and work with the private sector to deliver on the missions and the ambitious outcomes that the government set out. So I think it's doing two purposes. It's responding, and I think is with a foreword around the strategy itself. It sort of responds to where the government finances are at the moment and the look forward, and therefore there is a point of necessity. But I think it also looks to the ambitious plans and the missions set out, and that they have to be done hand in hand with the private sector. Is my view.
But of course, once this pipeline is published, I mean, it's unlikely that suddenly everyone's going to be digging holes on the ground and starting projects, is it? I mean, what are your ambitions? What are your expectations in terms of turning that pipeline into a realistic projects that get going?
Well, I think that's the key thing in terms of what is the sort of, I suppose, level of detail that comes out through the pipeline. Are they all sort of time phased? Do they have key milestones that are set within around when they'd hope to make decisions to invest? What is the likely funding route? When are they hoping to get to planning consent? There's a number of key things that would be interesting to see whether they're in the pipeline to articulate how that, the 700 billion is then spent ultimately.
Yeah, and I imagine also where it will be spent, because the strategy certainly does make a lot of points around supporting regional economic development and introducing this term, this concept of, I suppose, infrastructure parity across the UK. I mean, brackets, not everything being spent in London. I mean, how well do you see that strategy supporting that ambition?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the pleasing things to see really was around the sort of commitment to spatial planning, some of the commitments to local transport schemes that have been set out really should help to sort of spread the investment across the country. I think if you looked at the schemes that were in the 15.6, they were all over the various sort of regions that we operate in. Yeah. I think it's really good from our sort of business perspective. We operate in all those geographical regions, and it gave the teams a real excitement to see not only the development that they could look to seek to work on, but obviously the development for their communities themselves in the future.
And being driven through this new devolved administrations, whether they are mayors or devolved authorities, is going to be crucial. What new powers or other funding mechanisms do you think that they're going to need to really capitalise on this ambition and this new strategy?
Well, I think obviously a lot of this is still going to require sort of collaboration with central government in departments to really maximise the benefit of the schemes. So where there's national schemes interface with local, how does that sort of come together? I think obviously looking at the access to some of the private finance type mechanisms that may come up in future. But I suppose also it's the ability to get committed funding for the schemes that they believe are most effective for their region. Yeah. So I suppose it's back to that certainty point, isn't it? I think is one thing that will be good for them.
Well, given that we've got ambition. We've always got a pipeline. We've got a strategy. We've got a plan. One of the things which is likely to stall this whole ambition is the lack of skills. It's been discussed for years as a limiting factor when it comes to UK infrastructure delivery. What practical steps do you think are needed now to accelerate the building of this workforce capacity needed to deliver the pipeline?
Well, I suppose one of the things that this will give us is where are the skills needed? Obviously, once we can start to articulate where the investments are going to take place, I think the core thing then needs to be done is a real strategic, needs analysis of what are the capabilities and that are required, and then to take it from a challenge into both the private sector, but also what can government do to support the development and education, to encourage people into the sector.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing here is that this should make it, infrastructure really attractive proposition for people to work in, for graduates, apprentices. How do we sort of really sell the benefit of that being a really stable sort of platform to grow your career?
Yeah, and that's not just the big global companies. It's also a very large. One of the things about infrastructure, it has got a really large supply chain,
Sure.
And that means unlocking innovation and SME participation. I mean, how does the UK ensure that we have that robust supply chain right down deep into where it's needed?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Obviously, as an industry, we're generally quite fragmented anyway in terms of the way in which we operate. I think obviously there are the steps the government has recently taken on the New Procurement Act, which seeks to try and really encourage innovation to be brought through, and it sort of considers the SME agenda. How do they reduce some of the red tape? How do they encourage SMEs to participate in some of these? I think from a professional services perspective, we have seen a number of clients take the lead in encouraging SME type proportions of lots, or to really encourage that. I think obviously there's more to be needs to be done and continue to really make sure that we've got the supply chain that we will need in order to deliver this ambitious plan, isn't it? Is the sort of key point.
Well, yeah, I mean, and just to round us out, James, I mean, how do you think government can ensure that all these really warm and wise words that we see in the strategy, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of numbers, how do they make sure that this delivers the intended outcomes over the next 10 years?
I think it's a really good point, isn't it? Because I think I'm not sure of the basis of reflection or the assessment in terms of what are the key milestones in place. There's still some milestones that are to come around the where will PPPs be used initially? What's the target for them? What's the mechanism? So I think that there almost needs to be a sort of an underpinning set of of milestones that it can be measured against around whether that's be projects that have been taken through planning, whether or not it's how we've delivered on the sort of placemaking agenda on some of the integrated projects, how have the government cross departments, worked more effectively. So I think there's a number of things in there that this sort of strategy requires in order to be successful. So it would be great to see, once the pipeline comes through, as you say, what are the measures and milestones put in place that then says we're on track, as it were.
Yeah. Because ultimately, as we've said before, Keir Starmer and his government have got just under 4 years now to make sure that the steps that they're taking, the strategies they're publishing, actually make people's lives better when it comes to the next general election. Is this going to help?
You'd think it would be able to give confidence to people that actually that there is a sort of clear plan. I think obviously some of the schemes and things we refer to, some of them may not even seek planning and during this sort of current term.
Well, that's right, yeah. These are long-term investments. I suppose that's the big challenge for a government like this, thinking long-term but delivering short-term. Yeah,
and I think, and that's why I suppose in terms of some of the smaller schemes or some of the other elements and some of the local authorities that were planned, it sort of gives you that benefit of both. There was the mega project referenced, but also some of the more sort of local schemes that should make a real difference to people's lives as they go forward around, whether that's bus reform or whether that's into some of the light rail stuff or extensions of, it tries to fuse the two things together, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, James, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. It is a really interesting moment for infrastructure, and we as an industry, and I think you're very conscious of it, have to take this moment of ambition to actually start delivering. So, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts and for unpacking this new 10-year strategy for us today.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. Really good to be on.
Great stuff. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for on the podcast right now, but there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information on all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. Do subscribe at Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. Thanks for joining us, though. Thanks again to James. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.